I'm going to talk briefly about the syllabus for the course, and I'm going to trust you to read it in detail so that if I miss something, you capture it. But in terms of just the basics of the syllabus, there are 5 requirements. You have some reaction papers, you have an optional art project, you have a midterm, final, you have a presentation, and you have a paper. And I'll talk briefly about each one of those in order. The reaction papers, there are 4 of them, each worth 5% of the overall grade. And basically, if you stay on task, answer the question, turn it in on time, you'll get full credit for the assignment. The only exception is if there are 3 or more students in the class, you'll have to participate at least once on the discussion forum revolving around the reaction paper. Otherwise, again, it's full credit. I will correct the paper so you have a little insight in terms of how I approach writing assignments, but the corrections won't count against you. But take the information and generalize that to the paper, because the final paper, of course, the corrections will count against you. So learn as much as you can from me in terms of the reaction papers. The reaction papers don't have to be long, no more than 1 page, double-spaced. And again, stay on task, answer the question, turn it in on time. You should be good to go. There's an optional art project as well, which means what it says. It's optional. You can do it, or you can choose not to do it. If you choose to do it, you'll get full credit for it. The added addition is if there are 3 or more students in the class and your art project is the most creative submission, you'll be able to opt out of the presentation. So that's a little incentive to do it. The art project is basically very small. It's 5 inches by 5 inches by 5 inches, so it's very, very small. It should be about 90%, 95%, I should say, composed of natural materials, non-man-made materials. So rocks, branches, leaves, bark, whatever, non-man-made materials. There can be 3 man-made materials like hot glue, paper, some wire, that sort of thing, but no more than 3 man-made materials. And again, the proportion should be about 95% should be natural. So this shouldn't cost you an arm and a leg to do. It's all or nothing. You do it, turn it in on time, you get full credit. Otherwise, if you decide you don't want to do it, then something else gets weighed more. This is worth 10% of the overall grade. If you decide not to do it, then I add that 10% to the presentation or the paper or something else, okay? And you'll know when you read the syllabus where it's going to be added if you opt not to do the optional art project. There are 2 exams that are scheduled for the course, but you get to drop the lowest of the 2 grades. There's a midterm, which needs to be taken during midterm week, the middle of the quarter. There's a final that needs to be taken during the finals week. But again, you get to drop the lowest of the 2 grades. So if you take the midterm, you do great. You don't have to take the final. If you bomb the midterm, then really study well for the final. Now, I'm going to trust you to be honest and integrity-filled as you do these exams online, and that you're not looking at notes, your book. You've studied, you've prepared, and you're taking the test professionally and honestly, from an integrity-filled stance, okay? So I'm trusting you on that. And again, the fact that you can drop the lowest of the 2 scores, hopefully, says that, that's an added incentive for you to take that integrity-filled response set, okay? There's a presentation. The presentation and the paper actually can piggyback on the same topic because you're going to talk about a therapeutic approach. And which approach you decide to focus on is up to you, but If you decide to focus on person-centered therapy, for example, you can do, again, the presentation and the paper on the same approach. If you want to do it on 2 different therapeutic modalities, it's up to you, but it's cost-effective in terms of time management to do it on the same thing. And I think you'll learn more about the topic as a result. With the presentation, there are certain things that you need to keep in mind. You can use Keynote or you can use PowerPoint. It doesn't matter which one you use, which one that you feel most comfortable with. But you do need at least six slides. You need to define the therapeutic approach. You need to talk about some of the goals of the approach, some of the techniques, some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses, and then actually you need to provide a summary slide. So no more than 6 slides altogether, okay? When you do your presentation or when you put this PowerPoint or Keynote thing together, one thing I really, really want you to do is to not put paragraphs of material on your slides. I want you to have really brief, succinct bullets, you know, maybe a sentence here or there on a particular slide, but primarily, you know, something very short and sweet. Bullets would be great. If your bullet is not self-explanatory, then in your notes section, you know, explain it in much more detail. But on the slide itself, make it short and sweet, okay? On the first slide, when you define the therapeutic approach, in your notes section, regardless, talk about the introduction. How are you going to introduce this topic? Are you going to introduce it with activity, a skit, you know, or just with, you know, an illustration, whatever it is? Talk about the introduction in your notes section. That's the, you know, if you need help finding out how to do that, just get with me and I'll tell you how to do it. But that should be talked about in the notes section. And cite your references. As you go through this presentation, cite all your references in your notes section, okay? So define the therapeutic approach. Now, also, another thing I want you to keep in mind is that you want to use a variety of formats, at least 4 formats. You know, lecture is considered a format. Using a lot of pictures or photographs on your slides can be considered a format. A little video segment that you can have a link to in your slide presentation could be a format. Describing a skit you might do could be a format. On and on. There are all sorts of things. A visual aid, like a chart, could be a format. A cartoon picture could be a format. You know, so at least 4 formats should be used, okay? The other thing, you know, like I said earlier, you should have a slide on the approach, defining the approach, but goals. So the other thing is keeping in mind that there might be a large number of goals associated with a particular therapeutic approach, but just highlight some of the most important ones, or the ones that stood out the most to you, okay? Don't have to discuss every goal imaginable related to the therapeutic approach. The same thing applies to techniques. There might be a lot of techniques, but just pick 2 or 3 of the most important ones to talk about. Then you'll have a slide on 3 strengths you noticed as you read about the therapeutic approach, 3 strengths that you attach to the approach, and another slide for weaknesses, 3 weaknesses, and then a summary slide at the very end. Okay, and somewhere during this process should be in your notes section something about an activity, something that you do with the audience, you know, that brings them in and gets them doing something hands-on, you know. So be creative with that, whether it's a skit and you draw some people in to do a skit, whether it's, you know, a quiz, which won't be very fun, but something much more entertaining like an activity, a game, or something like that. Describe that in your notes section, and we'll be good. Okay, so that's a little bit about the presentation. Finally, the paper. Now, the paper is, again, you can talk about the same thing. You can talk about the therapeutic approach that you discussed in terms of the presentation. You define the therapeutic intervention. You talk about goals. You talk about techniques. You talk about strengths and weaknesses of the approach, and you have a summary. No more than 6 pages. Okay, gotta get my numbers right here. No more than 6 pages, okay? And that actually can include your title page, your abstract page, and your reference page. So really, you don't need more than 3 pages of text if you can get away with it, all right? So 6 pages, great. And the thing you should know about me, the more pages you have, the more opportunities I have to find mistakes. So yeah, make sure you keep it short and sweet. There's a little section on this online in this online course on APA style. You need to use the most recent edition, the 6th edition of the American Psychological Association's publication manual. So I'll go over it in some detail, but you really need to consult the book itself before you turn the paper in. The other thing with the paper is that when you paraphrase or when you quote, what I want you to do is turn in the journal articles that you use. Circle on the journal article itself, or if you're using a textbook, make a copy of that page where you use some material. Circle that information and tell me where I will find that information in your paper. So you'll say, page 5 of my paper, paragraph 2, the first sentence is where you'll find this material. Okay. So hopefully you use that as a check to make sure that you're not accidentally plagiarizing the paper. Because remember, when you use, at least in my classes, when you use 4 words or more from an author, word for word, that material needs to be placed in quotes. In addition, you need to cite the last name of the author and the year. When you paraphrase, it's just the last name of the author and the year. But when you quote, you have to put the material in quotes, author, last name of the author, the year, and I forgot to mention the page number or the paragraph number if you're using an internet source and there are no page numbers listed. But you really shouldn't use the internet because oftentimes it's not peer refereed, and you really need to stick as much as possible to peer refereed sources because this is a scholarly paper. We've elevated to the graduate level. We want you to work on scholarly papers. So keep that in mind. And when I look at the paper, I'm going to grade it in 2 domains. Did you cover the content, the therapeutic approach, the goals, the techniques, strengths, weaknesses, and a summary? Did you cover the content, and did you use appropriate APA format and writing style? I mean, did you use commas where you should use commas, semicolons when you should use semicolons, on and on the list goes, and APA format, 1-inch margins, the right headings, the right spacing, and so forth. Again, there's a section in here on APA format, so definitely listen to it and pick up the APA publication manual because you'll be using that throughout your entire program here at La Sierra University. Okay, so I think I've covered at least in some detail what's required for the course. Outside of that, I hope you really enjoy the course. I think there's a lot of things you can learn, whether or not you're heading into a counseling-related career, because I realize a lot of you are taking the teaching pathway or the administration pathway, but even so, there's a lot to learn about human dynamics and human behavior that I think you can get out of this course. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon with some other material.